What I'm trying to do with this game is kind of capture all that kind of like cool head-hurting stuff you see in movies like Primer or Back to the Future, and kind of distill that down into this very kind of pure and focused experience.
I'm joined today by Bryan Gale, who is the developer behind Induction, which is coming out on February 7th. So thank you for taking a little time to talk with us about this game, Bryan. And to begin, why don't you give us a pitch for Induction? Tell us a little bit about what it is and why people should be interested.
Okay, so Induction, it's an abstract puzzle game about time travel and paradoxes. So the game starts off fairly simply. You have the power to jump back in time, and you can cooperate with your past self. So an early puzzle might be something like you hold down, you stand on a switch to hold open a bridge. You jump back in time, and then you can cross the bridge while your past self is holding it open. And from there, it gets weirder. And what I'm trying to do with this game is kind of capture all that kind of like cool head-hurting stuff you see in movies like Primer or Back to the Future, and kind of distill that down into this very kind of pure and focused experience. And my hope with this game is that I can just like slightly rewire how you think about cause and effect.
I think you have accomplished that with our review coming. People will see that this is a brain-hurting game. The first question I want to ask you is why you tackled time travel in this way. There's a lot of games that have tackled the idea of time travel in all different genres, but why a puzzle game like this? At first glance, you wouldn't think Induction really lends itself to time travel, even though I think it does phenomenally.
So I'd kind of want to make it like a game about time travel for a while, just because I thought it's just a cool subject to try and tackle.
Sure.
And actually, for a while, I'd tried avoiding kind of doing a game about time travel because I knew it would be like a big subject. I didn't want to tackle it for my first indie game
Hmm.
because I thought like I just want to like make a quick 6 month thing. If I do a game about time travel, it just like turn into this huge project, and here I am 3.5 years later. So I tried to not make a game about time travel, couldn't quite get motivated about doing something else, so kind of ended up getting pulled back into doing my time travel game. Why I decided to tackle it as a puzzle game? I feel like it very well suits how my head works. So my background is in mathematics. I did mathematics at university, and I felt like making puzzles for this game, it sort of feels a lot like a process of kind of like doing degree level mathematics. It sort of like activates the same bits of your head, I think. And doing it as a puzzle game, it also kind of fitted well with how like I wanted to approach making this game. What I didn't want to do is kind of have a list of kind of cool moments that I want to happen and then just kind of make them happen. What I wanted to do was kind of build the simulation, kind of build like the laws of physics and put time travel in there, and then investigate it myself to see kind of what falls out of that.
Perfect.
And then building puzzles is kind of my way of saying like, oh hey, here's what I've discovered, and I'd like to share that with you.
I think that's awesome. You kind of touched on there's this internal logic to the game. You've kind of set the rules and let people loose in this world. I'm wondering how many iterations of that internal logic you went through. What the process of really nailing down those laws, I guess if you want to call them, of induction was like. If it's something that kind of solidified pretty quickly, or if it's something that took a lot of different trial and error.
It took a long time. I think I've been working on the game for about a year or so before I had stuff kind of really nailed down. So I mean, a lot of this is kind of quite hard to describe without diagrams, but just to kind of so I'm simplifying a bit here. But how it started off, you could jump through time as many times as you wanted. Right now in the final game, like you start off each level with one jump through time, and you'd kind of be able to kind of like rewind back and forth freely as you wanted. Whereas in the final game, how it works is like you press a single button and you're instantly like back at the start of the level.
Right.
So kind of every iteration has kind of just like been simplifying it. One of the big things that kind of prompted me to simplify it was I discovered a game called Still Time by another London-based developer called Alan Zacconi, and that I kind of like watched a video and I was like, oh, this is doing exactly what I was going to do, so I should probably try and find something different. So just from discovering Alan's game, that prompted me to first make the simplification that instead of having kind of free jump, like free choice kind of way you jump through in time, it's kind of simplified to just a button press and you're back in time. And because it kind of investigating design a bit further, it turned out actually being able to jump back to any point doesn't actually gain you that much. It kind of it can feel good and it seems like the obvious design to do, but in terms of puzzles you can express with that power, but you can't express with a simplified version. You're not really losing anything by simplifying it.
Sure, yeah, I can see
So,
that.
so
Yeah.
that was kind of like the first big simplification. And the other one was getting rid of the kind of effectively infinite time jumps. So I'd kind of had quite strong in my head, like, no, I don't want to restrict this power at all. I want you to be able to use it as many times as you want. And then I'd taken it along to one of the London Indies pub meetups. And one of the designers had just gave me this very, very stern telling off about how hard my game was. And he was like, no, you need to simplify this. No one's going to get it. I think it's cool, but most people are not going to get it. And he had this idea of rather than having infinite time jumps, you just have it as just for one time jump. And I was skeptical that was going to work. And then I tried it and I showed it at an event with this kind of one jump mechanic, and that was the first time I'd really seen an audience of people properly get my game. So it's like, oh, this is what I should be doing. But then the game became, how do you use this one jump you have to the biggest possible effect? That
Sure.
kind of became a game, and it kind of later on, as I guess you see now, it kind of expands from that. But from the very start, and just by default, you just have this one jump to play with. And then kind of within that were a few other detours I ended up going on. So there was a version of the game that I sort of had in my head. It did for time what VVV did for gravity.
Ah, cool.
So it would
Cool
be
analogy.
yeah. So you'd press you'd just be going forward through time as normal, and then you'd press a button, and time would reverse around you, and you could press a button again, and it'd go back the way where it was going. And I still think and I couldn't quite get enough working puzzles with that to justify building a game around that, but I think that's an idea I might come back to at some point.
Cool.
Maybe for the sequel? I don't know.
Cool.
Just trying to think, there was something else as well. Sorry, it's escaped me now.
That's all right. So kind of transitioning from induction to development is kind of a nice jumping point in this particular interview, which I'd love you to touch on your experience with the Stugan. So tell people what this was, and then I'd love if you could share maybe a lesson you learned that you think people could use outside of that environment.
Okay. So Stugan, it was basically a summer camp for game developers. So it was this program that sent a couple of dozen indie game developers for 2 months to go live in these cabins in the Swedish countryside, and it was an absolutely beautiful place to work. Had this lovely lake nearby. We'd go swimming in. Had a sauna. All the food was provided for us, and it was just incredible. And it was such a lovely experience, kind of working on a game, being surrounded by all these other talented developers, and it kind of one of the biggest things was it just removed the normal stress of everyday life. So if you're not worrying about bills or worrying about housemates or needing to go out and buy food, basic stuff like that, you can kind of get your head so much deeper into what you're working on. And I found going for I'd be able to just go for these long walks in the countryside and just kind of work on a design problem in my head and not really have to think about anything else. And it was just incredible. Yeah, it was just such a bizarre experience.
Cool. It sounded like an interesting point, and kind of moving from the game to you as a developer, what is your story of indie game development? What drew you to it, and what's kind of your path been like?
I mean, I'd made like back at university, we had a kind of a game development society. I'd have made a few games with them, and then my first experience in industry was working for a small startup called Playfish, and they were one of like the very early Facebook game developers.
Hmm.
So they're kind of making Facebook games before like people had really figured out how to make money from Facebook games. So
Sure.
everything kind of wasn't quite so nailed down. Like there was a point where kind of like everyone was just making Farmville clones for
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Facebook, and this was before that where I was still kind of
Right.
experimenting. And the game I was working on there as kind of the first thing, like when it, as just like the first thing I was working on at my company was it was basically an indie game.
Hmm.
Like they paired me up with an artist, gave me this quite broad concept of make a worm style game for Facebook,
Hmm.
and then we kind of had free reign within that to do what we wanted. And I sort of didn't realize at the time just like how rare that was. So we had this kind of lovely thing of kind of okay, this is yeah of uh, of kind of like being able to kind of have free reign, but also within like a company structure. And then kind of like later on, everything kind of got a bit more rigid. They figured out, okay, this is what makes money. This is kind of what we're going to do now.
Sure.
And then they just got a bit disillusioned with that. Um, and then like a few years later, kind of like quit my job to kind of like pursue what I'm doing now. So I kind of feel like getting into indie games was kind of coming back to what I was doing originally, what
That
I'd
makes sense.
always
Yeah.
done. Yeah, and this kind of interlude where I was making kind of soulless but profitable games on Facebook was kind of like the bit in between. So bit in between where I was like doing Induction was kind of coming back to what I'd already been doing.
Right. Cool. We like to ask developers what games have been inspirations for them, either in your past growing up, or more currently, if there's been a game that's really captured your attention and gotten the creative juices going.
Um, I mean, like the obvious one to mention is kind of is Braid.
Mm.
But though it's not so much because Braid's another game about time travel. It's more like the design philosophy around it. Like John Blow he's spoken a lot about the design philosophy behind Braid, about how it's not really about trying to make a game that's fun. It's more trying to you're making a game to kind of like unveil certain truths.
Mm.
And I kind of like that approach. I'm not so much thinking like I don't necessarily think like okay, is this puzzle fun? It's more, is this puzzle saying something unique? Is this puzzle kind of like telling some? Is this puzzle like telling the player something that I haven't kind of? Is it puzzle kind of giving players something that I haven't already given them? So and also the approach of kind of just sort of being respectful of the player's time
Mm. Yeah, that makes
and not
sense.
ju- yeah and like the philosophy in kind of back when I was making Facebook games was very much do whatever we can to like keep people like sat in front of the game,
Right.
and it was kind of quite. I always found that kind of quite manipulative, whereas the philosophy kind of like John Blow talks about is very much kind of like be respectful, give them something that they kind of want to engage with, and actually kind of try and give them something.
Yeah, fair. To bring this to a close, we always like to ask developers what other indie dev teams or indie games are being made that are really speaking to them, that are doing something innovative or cool. So we hope that you would share with us what
Okay,
are.
yeah, yeah. I've got a few I want to mention. Aerobat by a guy called Matthew Yeager. So it's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. We were exhibiting together in the Indie Mega booth in 2015, and his game would always be the one where, like, if I got in early before all crowds, his would be like the game I would go to because it's just felt incredible. So it's this mouse-controlled side-scrolling shoot 'em up, and you kind of the mechanic is that your ship can either fire or it can thrust, but it can't do both at the same time.
Hmm.
And you sort of have to like use your mouse to kind of fling it across the screen. And there's this incredible sensation of speed behind it, and the whole game just like feels and looks incredible.
Cool.
Uh, then there's 12 Minutes by a guy called Luis Antonio. So it's basically Groundhog Day the game.
Hmm.
it's sort of taking the opposite approach to time travel that I am, where I'm making my game kind of like very very abstract, whereas he's kind of putting it into this like very kind of like mundane everyday setting, and you're kind of stuck in this 12-minute time loop, and just kind of trying to figure out why and what's going on. And the last one I want to mention is Tori Ansei. It's kind of like a point and click adventure game, but it's more focused on the storytelling than like the puzzle solving aspect. I think that game kind of had the debut in the same place I did, so we were both in the 2014 Left Field collection at EGX, and it's kind of the art style is kind of it's like low poly Studio Ghibli, and it looks really lovely, and it's kind of has this nice thing of mixing mixing kind of like very mundane scenarios with kind of like this layer of magical realism on top of it.
Cool. Awesome. Great suggestions. So Bryan Gale, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of background about Induction and a little bit of background about yourself. You can look for Induction out on February 7th.
Cool. Thank you for inviting me on here to talk about my game.